guys? I wanted to have a little chat with you tonight about fear for the most part. Now, over the past 2 years, media has been focused, seemingly solely focused on scaring people and keeping them scared, making you fear everything. Fearing the pandemic, fearing your neighbors, having contact with people you care about. And it can be debated whether or not the pandemic was worth all of that, or whether it justified all of that fear mongering. But for 2 years, we've had fear of the pandemic, fear of each other, fear of people that were not jabbed, fear of pretty much everything shoved down our throats. You have to be afraid. You have to be afraid. This will kill you. Now, it seems to be that the pandemic is slowly starting to fizzle out. It's becoming endemic, meaning it's something we're going to be living with for the rest of our lives, and for probably forever, much like the regular flu or the common cold. And now media doesn't have quite as much to scare people with. The pandemic is losing its effectiveness for creating fear and keeping people in control. So now they've got to switch gears. And all you hear about on the TV right now, it's constantly Russia, Ukraine, China, Russia, Ukraine. So that seems to be their new method for instilling fear and trying to keep control of people. Whether it's something that warrants that type of fear or not, I don't know. I'm not going to go into wargaming, the Russia, Ukraine, or even the China, Taiwan issues right now. But what I wanted to talk to you about is whether it's the pandemic, whether it's an economic collapse that seems to be going around right now. We seem to be going, or we don't seem to. We are going through a very slow economic collapse right now. It will pick up speed, but back to what I was saying, whether we're going through a pandemic, whether you're worried about the economic collapse or World War III or zombies or aliens or whatever it is that you're scared of or freaking out about, worried about, whatever it is that you're prepping for, it's all the same. And what I mean by that is, yeah, there are minor differences. You know, there's things that you would prepare for a nuclear war that you wouldn't worry about with an economic collapse. There's things about a pandemic that would need consideration during preparations that you wouldn't necessarily worry about during World War III. Although throughout history, war, famine, and disease all seem to coincide. One usually begets the other. Sometimes it's famine creates wars and results in disease. Sometimes it's war that creates the other two. But in the end, it's all the same. except for certain subtle differences. When you're prepping for one, you're prepping for the others. What you're doing, or what the goal is to prep for loss of support systems. You know, simple things like where are you going to get your food? Where are you going to get your power from? What about water filtration? Where's your water source? Hygiene, wastewater, waste. You need to take those into consideration. Security, police, fire, EMS. All of these things are things that have to be considered regardless of which of the scenarios that you're prepping for. And again, there are minor differences depending on what you're preparing for, but if you prepare for loss of support systems, if you prepare for system failure in general, overall you're going to be preparing for the bigger, less likely events. And in the meantime, you will also be preparing for more likely events that are often overlooked: tornadoes, floods, blizzards, hurricanes, droughts, all number of things like that. So the goal as preppers is to increase our self-reliance. Now, it'd be almost impossible to be completely self-sufficient, but you can be self-reliant. Now, the difference between self-sufficient and self-reliant, I want to cover that real briefly, is self-reliant means that you're not completely dependent on other people for your needs, your basic needs. That you're able to rely on yourself for extended periods of time. Self-sufficient implies that you don't need any outside resources, that you can provide everything for yourself. Now, it's not impossible to be completely self-sufficient, but it is an extremely hard level to reach. So the best place to start is with being self-reliant. Self-sufficient, if that's your goal and you can get there, more power to you, go for it. But for the average person, you can't, the average person, how do I put this? Most of the average people don't have more than 2 or 3 days of food in their house. If they lose their power, they don't have any kind of backup system. If they lose if their water gets turned off for some reason, they don't have any source of water other than running to the store and buying jugs of water. And that is a very finite source. You only have a certain amount of that you can do. It's not sustainable. So it's important that we as preppers build redundancy in our lives so that if one of our systems of support fails, it's not a big deal. You know, if you have your own well, you're not worried about if city water gets turned off. Now, if your well pump goes down due to loss of power, then you got to worry about that. But if you have a generator, again, that's not a problem. But let's look at that in another way. You can't run a generator constantly just to provide water. I mean, you can, but you're going to burn up an awful lot of fuel. A smarter way of doing that would be setting up a reserve tank between your well and your house so that if the power does go out, that well pump will have been feeding that reserve tank. And if you do empty that reserve tank, you can hook up your generator, power your well pump, and refill that reserve tank, and then shut your generator off. That is a basic breakdown of being self-reliant. You're building redundancy into your life so that you can continue to live your life in comfort, even if the systems around you go down, if the grid goes down. The same can be said with food, and I've harped on it many times in my videos. Grow your own food, freeze it, can it, dehydrate it, stack it. Produce as much of your own food as you possible. Barter with people close to you for the things that you can't produce. That's why you need a community of people around you that you can network with. Power, again, I've already covered it. You can have a generator, you can have a windmill, you can have a solar panel system, both of those of which can be hooked up to a battery bank. If you have a stream near your house, depending on the type of stream it is, you could, in theory, use hydroelectric power as your power source. For security, you pretty much have to rely on yourself for that. And there's a lot of preppers tend to focus solely on guns and ammo, and that's all well and good, but you need to look into things like force multipliers. And all that means is, for those that don't know, a force multiplier is something that multiplies your efficiency. Can make one person do the job of many, basically. Good examples of that would be an alarm system. Hang on one second. An alarm system, which is dependent on power, but there again, you know, there are multiple different types of security systems. You can have security cameras around your property. You can have motion sensors, which set off an audible alarm. Things like that would allow you to possibly catch some rest. And if there's movement around your property and you hear the alarm go off, that could wake you up. Now, that's not ideal. Ideally, you would want to have multiple people in your group so that you could take turns on guard duty, providing security. But in the event that it's just you, or you and your spouse, or you and your kids, those would be an enormous benefit to you for increasing your safety. It's not all about weapons. It's not all about ammo. And I'm a gun guy. I love my guns. I love my ammo, but it's not the end all be all. There are many things that you can do to aid in your security that that would be extremely beneficial. The point of this discussion, though, is that throughout history, civilizations have risen and they've fallen, time and time again. Now, during those rises and falls. Lots of people have died. Lots of people have suffered. You can mitigate that, or possibly even avoid a lot of that suffering, simply by becoming more reliant, more self-reliant, and more prepared for the loss of those benefits of those societies. People are still here. No matter how many times civilization has risen and fallen, people are still here. We'll always be here. Unless we wipe each other out with nuclear weapons, which is not entirely out of the realm of possibility, but when I was in school as a kid, it was thought that we launch weapons, nuclear weapons at each other, it's going to wipe out the entire world. Well, that's not necessarily true anymore. I mean, yes, depending on the number of nuclear weapons that are launched, yeah, that could definitely wipe out the world if enough of them are launched. But through study of nuclear weapons through World War II and experience gained with wars and weapons, it's been discovered that nuclear weapons aren't quite as unsurvivable as we thought 60 years ago. You don't necessarily have to be in a bunker a half mile underground to survive a nuclear war. It'll certainly increase your chances of surviving one, but provided you're in the right area and not in the target zone or directly downwind of any fallout, it's survivable. Might not be pleasant, might be a horrible experience, but it is survivable. So we have to look at the basics of everything that we need. And again, when we go back to basics, and I harp on this through all my videos, and a lot of other preppers do too, a lot of other YouTube creators do, but it all comes down to the basics: food, water, shelter, defense, hygiene. You know, it's all the same basics. Cover those and you should be good. It's not a foolproof guarantee, but for everything you do, for every precaution you take, it certainly increases your odds of survival. And not only survival, but it increases your chances of thriving. Now, another thing that a lot of preppers tend to do is they choose one of two things: going lone wolf or creating a small group. And each has its pros and cons. You know, the survivability of going lone wolf, maybe 6 to 8 months, maybe. It can be done longer, I suppose, but it is highly dependent on the person and the skill set. Your odds go up exponentially in a group setting, but there are challenges with that as well. But it's for each person to make their own decision as to whether they're going to go lone wolf or with a MAG, a mutual assistance group. And you don't necessarily have to do either one. You could potentially set it yourself up so that you don't have a MAG, but you do have people in your community that you can call on in an emergency. So look into those and evaluate yourself, your skill sets, your situation, where you live, the threats that you think you face, and try to customize your plans accordingly. What works for me, what works for somebody else, won't necessarily work for you. Everybody's situation is different, and therefore everybody's plan is going to be different. And finally, one of the final points that I wanted for this video is that on the subject of fear, primarily from the news, but also from other prepper sources, and on my channel, it may seem like at times like I'm trying to spread fear, but I'm not. I would prefer that you be aware of what's going on around you, keep aware of current events, and you use that to prepare proactively. You don't wait until something has happened and then react with a knee-jerk reaction. You need to prepare proactively by thinking ahead and planning things out. What would I do if this happens? What would I do if this happens? Then, if you do that correctly, when that happens, whatever that is, you're not panicking, you're not worried, you're not stressing things out. You're like, okay, I've got this covered. It makes things so much easier, and you'll be so much better prepared for dealing with it. But like I said, I got kind of sidetracked there, but my final point for this was, with the news media, with preppers, with YouTube channels and all these forums and everything, it's easy to let fear consume you. People live in enough stress as it is, and a certain level of stress is natural, but the amount of stress and fear that we as a society have been subjected to over the past year to 2 years is quite frankly ridiculous. I'm losing some of my light here. We've been subjected to constant, unending, ridiculous levels of fear. My point, yeah, I know I keep rambling and I keep getting off track, but my point, don't let fear guide your actions. Make plans. Observe what's going on around you, but don't let your fear rule your actions and rule your life. You can't live in fear. Don't panic. If you've prepared, if you've planned, there's no need to panic. And when you know exactly what to do or how to respond in a certain situation, your odds of survivability go up considerably. But in the end, there's only so much you can do. Your preps can only take you so far. There's only so much you can prepare for. There's only so much you can plan out and strategize. In the end, you need to, at some point, you've got to turn the news off. Stop listening to the fear-mongering. Don't forget in your prepping and your planning, and you're trying to be ready for this emergency or this disaster or that crisis. You have to live your life. A lot of times people get so obsessed and consumed with prepping that they forget that. It's easy to do, but you have to live your life. Go out, have fun, do something fun, go on an adventure, take a little trip. Whether it's a road trip or whatever, be aware of the risks that you're taking along the way. If you're traveling outside the country, be aware of what kind of risks are there and how to keep yourself safe, but have fun. Spend time with your families. Make memories. Live your life. That's my final thought on this tonight is prepare, plan, be ready, but live your life. Don't let it consume you, and don't live in a constant state of fear. All right, guys, that's all I've got for right now. I know you can barely see me in the dark here. My little fire is going out here, but that's all I've got for the night. Just a little fireside chat, some thoughts that were on my mind. I appreciate you guys watching. Like, share, subscribe if you haven't. I've got something I'm going to be doing here pretty soon that I'm hoping you guys might like. But do what I said, live your life. Don't live out of fear, okay? You guys take care of yourselves, and I'll catch you guys later. Good night.